Hello, welcome back to Take 10. Thanks for joining us for another lesson. My name's Maddie, and today we're going to keep talking about chapters 7 and 8, trading perspectives and solutions. All right, so let's get started. All right, so our icebreaker question for today is, if you could travel to any period in time, where would you go and why? So I'm going to have you guys pause the video here. Go ahead and answer this question, share with your neighbors, and then come back after about a minute or so. Okay, so if I could travel to any period in time, I would probably go back to around the 1850s or 60s, the pioneer time. I always loved the pioneer era. I loved the Little House on the Prairie books, which is what you see in that top part of the screen. And when I was little, I spent a few summers at Pioneer Camp getting to dress up in pioneer clothes and churning butter and sewing and stuff like that. So I think it'd be fun to go there for a little bit, but I wouldn't want to stay very long. Okay, so our review question from before is, what is the definition of perspective? So I'm going to have you guys go ahead, pause the video here, and then come back after you've had a chance to discuss as a class and come up with the definition. Okay, so perspective. Well, first, I like this little GIF because at first the man looks really big and the woman looks really small, but then you end up seeing it's actually not that one of them is much larger than the other. It's just the way the room is shaped, and so it's the perspective that we have that makes them look so different. But the definition of perspective is a person's point of view. So hopefully you guys remember that from last time, because we're going to be talking about that more today. All right, so as we go through our discussion for today, I just wanted to remind you guys of this Take 10 principle. Talk it out, walk it out, wait it out, and knowing when to get help can work in a violence-free zone. Okay, so just keep that in mind as we're going through our discussion today. And this slide, it's the same as one that we looked at last week, but I just wanted a quick reminder of what trading perspectives means, because we're going to be looking at that in much more detail today. So trading perspectives is when you look at conflict from another person's point of view. All right, so trading perspectives, looking at the conflict from another person's point of view. Okay. So now we have a little activity for you guys today, and it is the Butter Battle book. So maybe some of you have read this story before. It's a Dr. Seuss book, and I know it's for little kids, but I think it really simplifies trading perspectives down and is a really good example of what we're talking about here. And so as we're going through this book, I want you guys to think about a young kid that you know. Maybe it's a sibling, a cousin, a neighbor, someone you babysit for, and think about if you were listening to this book as a kid. And maybe more specifically, think of it as if you were reading this book to a kid. What would you want them to understand? What do you think they would understand? How would you talk to them about what is perspective? That's a pretty big word to try and explain to a younger kid. So I just want you guys to kind of think about that as we're going through the book. I have a little recording that will read the book to you guys, since I don't have it here with me. But the big questions I want you to think about are, what is the message of the book? And what is the role of perspective? And try to answer those questions as if you were yourself, but teaching it to a younger student. Make sense? Hopefully it does. Okay, so here is the Butter Battle book.
The Butter Battle Book by Dr. Seuss. On the last day of summer, 10 hours before fall, my grandpa took me out to the wall. For a while he stood silent, then he finally said, with a very sad shake of his very old head, "As you know, on this side of the wall, we are Zooks. On the far other side of this wall live the Zooks." Then my grandfather said, "It's high time that you knew of the terribly horrible thing that Zooks do. In every Zook house and in every Zook town, every Zook eats his bread with the butter side down." But we Yooks, as you know, when we breakfast or sup, spread our bread, Grandpa said, with the butter side up. That's the right, honest way, Grandpa gritted his teeth. So you can't trust a Zook who spreads bread underneath. Every Zook must be washed. He has kinks in his soul. That's why, as a youth, I made watching my goal. Watching Zooks for the Zook watching Border Patrol. In those days, of course, the wall wasn't so high that I could look any Zook square in the eye. If he dared to come close, I could give him a twitch with my tough, tufted, prickly snickberry switch. For a while that worked fine, while the Zooks stayed away and our country was safe. Then one terrible day, a very rude Zook by the name of Van Itch snuck up and slingshotted my snickberry switch. With my broken off switch, with my head hung in shame, to the chief Yukaroo in great sorrow I came. But our leader just smiled. He said, "You're not to blame, and those Zooks will be sorry they started this game. We'll dress you up right in a fancier suit. We'll give you a fancier slingshot to shoot." And he ordered the boys in the back room to figure how to build me some sort of triple sling jigger. With my triple sling jigger, I sure felt much bigger. I marched to the wall with great vim and great vigor, right up to Van Itch with my hand on the trigger. "I'll have no more nonsense," I said with a frown, "from Zooks who eat bread with the butter side down." Van Itch looked quite sickly. He ran off quite quickly. I'm unhappy to say he came back the next day in a spiffy new suit with a big new machine, and he snarled as he said, looking frightfully mean, "You may fling those hard rocks with your triple sling jigger, but I also now have my hand on the trigger. My wonderful weapon, the jigger rock snatch 'em. We'll fling 'em right back just as quick as we catch 'em. We'll have no more nonsense. You'll take no more gup from you Yooks who eat bread with the butter side up." "I have failed, sir," I sobbed as I made my report to the chief Yukaroo in the headquarters fort. He just laughed. "You've done nothing at all of the sort. Our slingshots have failed. That was old-fashioned stuff. Slingshots, dear boy, are not modern enough. All we need now is some newfangled kind of a gun. My boys in the back have already begun to think of a walloping whiz-zinger one. My bright boys are thinking they're on the right track. They'll think one up quick, and we'll send you right back. They thought up a great one, they certainly did. They thought up a gun for the Kickapoo Kid, which they loaded with powerful poo-a-doo powder, and ants' eggs and bees' legs, and dried fried clam chowder. And they carefully trained a real smart dog named Daniel to serve as our country's first gun-toting spaniel. And Daniel, the Kickapoo Spaniel, and I marched back to the wall, with our heads held up high, while everyone cheered and the cheers filled the sky. Fight, fight for the butter side up, do or die. Well, we didn't do, and we didn't quite die, but we sure did get worsted, poor Daniel and I. Van Itch was there too, and as he said, the old pig, the boys in my back room invented this rig, called the 8-nozzled, elephant-toted boom Blitz. It shoots high-explosive sour cherry stone pits. It will put your dumb Kickapoo Kid in the fritz. Poor Daniel and I, we were scared out of our wits. Once more, by Van Itch I was bested and beat. Once again I limped home from the wall in defeat. I dragged and I sagged, and my spirits were low, as low as I thought that they ever could go. When I heard a boom-ba and a diddle-dee-dill, and our buttered-up band marched up over the hill. The chief Yukaroo has sent them to meet me, along with the right-side-up song girls to greet me. They sang, "Oh, be faithful, believe in thy butter," and they lifted my spirits right out of the gutter. "My boy," smiled the chief Yukaroo, "we've just voted and made you a general. You've been promoted. Your pretty new uniform's ready. Get in it. The big war is coming. You're going to begin it. And what's more, this time, you are certain to win it." My boys in the back room have finally found how. Just wait to see what they've puttered up now. In their great new machine, you'll fly over that wall and clobber those butter-done Zooks one and all. Those boys in the back room sure knew how to putter. They made me a thing called the utterly sputter, and I jumped aboard with my heart all aflutter and steered toward the land of the upside-down butter. This machine was so modern, so frightfully new, no one knew quite exactly just what it would do. But it had several faucets that sprinkled blue goo, which somehow would sprinkle the Zooks as I flew, and gum up that upside-down butter they chew. I was racing pell-mell when I heard a voice yell, "If you sprinkle with Zooks, you get sprinkled as well." Van Itch had a sputter exactly like mine, and he yelled, "My blue gooer is working just fine. I'm here to say that if Zooks can goo Zooks, you'd better forget it, 'cause Zooks can goo Yooks." I flew right home, and as you may have guessed, I was downright despondent, disturbed, and depressed. And I saw, just as soon as I stepped back on land, so were all of the girls of the buttered up band. The chief drum majorette, Ms. Yuki and Sue, said that was pretty sour flight that you flew, and the chief Yugaru has been looking for you. I ran to his office, the place was a sight. "Have no fear," said the chief, "everything is all right. My bright back room boys have been brighter than bright. They've thought up a gadget that's newer than new. It is filled with mysterious moo-laka-moo, and can blow all those Zooks clear to Salamagoo. They've invented the Bitsy Big Boy Boomeroo. You just run to the wall like a nice little man. Drop this bomb on the Zooks just as fast as you can. I've ordered all Yooks to stay safe underground while the Bitsy Big Boy Boomeroo is around." As I raced for that wall with the bomb in my hand, I noticed that every last Yook in our land was obeying our chief Yugaru's grim command. They were all bravely marching, with banners aflutter, down a hole for their country, and right side up butter. That's when Grandpa found me. He grabbed me, he said, "You should be down that hole, and you're up here instead. But perhaps this is all for the better somehow. You'll see me make history right here and right now." Grandpa leapt up that wall with a lopulous leap, and he cleared his hoarse throat with a populous beep. He screamed, "Here's the end of that terrible town, full of Zooks who eat bread with the butter side down." And at the very instant, we heard a clup-clup of feet on the wall, and old Van Itch clumped up. The boys in his back room had made him one too, and his fist was another big boy boomeroo. "I'll blow you," he yelled, "into pork and wee beans. I'll butter side up you to small smithereens." "Grandpa," I shouted, "be careful, oh gee! Who's going to drop it? Will you or will he?" "Be patient," said Grandpa. "We'll see. We will see."
Okay, so I know that was a story for young kids, but hopefully you guys were able to listen to it and appreciate the message that it has. So it does talk a lot about perspective versus you have the Yooks and you have the Zooks, and the only difference between them is that one likes their toast butter side up and one likes it butter side down. So it's a very trivial difference in perspective, but it leads into a pretty big conflict. And I know we're not talking about escalating right now, but it does bring that up. You guys can see how their conflict escalated from, it started with slingshots and it ended at bombs. So that kind of is just a little review of something we've talked about before, how anger can escalate, how conflict can escalate and become worse. So that was just a little side note there. Now the activity I have for you guys to do is I want you to divide up into two groups. And whether you just want to part right down the middle or if your teacher wants to divide you up, however you guys want to do that, I'm fine with it. But one group needs to be the Yooks and one needs to be the Zooks. And then in your groups, I want you to discuss the following questions. And as you're answering them, I want you to try to answer from the perspective of your group. So if your group is identified as the Yooks, then try to answer as if you were a Yook. If you're the Zooks, try to answer as if you were the Zooks. Make sense? Great. So the questions I have for you, which side is at fault? And remember, which side do you think is at fault as your group? So if you're a Yook, what side do you think is at fault? And if you're a Zook, which side do you think is at fault? And then what escalated the conflict? What was the real issue that was the conflict? What stereotypes does the grandfather pass down to his grandson? And what does this book teach children? So I'm going to have you guys go ahead, pause the video here, and discuss these questions in your group. It should be about 5 to 10 minutes. So go ahead, pause the video, and then come back after you've all had a chance to discuss. Okay, great. Thank you for discussing those. And hopefully you guys kind of gained a better understanding and appreciation of why we use that story today. So the other part of our activity, in order to do that, we first need to understand the definition of cultural understanding. So cultural understanding is when you have a sensitive awareness for a person, community, or society's predominant beliefs, behaviors, and other products of human thought and work. So cultural understanding is when you are aware and you appreciate another culture, community, person's, kind of their perspective. Okay, make sense with that? Great. So then we have a few questions for you. First, how can trading perspectives be applied to real-world conflicts? So to answer that question, just a sentence or two, and if you want to include an example, like trading perspectives could be used to work on the issue of racism. That's a big issue today, and I think a big part of it is that one side doesn't understand the other side's perspectives. We lack a cultural understanding. So how could we apply trading perspectives to that situation? And that kind of goes into our second question. Think of a conflict that you could apply trading perspectives to in the real world. How could we apply cultural understanding to resolve this conflict? So actually, that racism example would work much better for the second question. The first one is just more basic. How can you apply trading perspectives to any general conflict? So if you guys want to use the racism example for your second one, you're more than welcome to, and just elaborate a little bit more. Or there are lots of other issues too that we could apply trading perspectives to. For example, religion. We have lots of people of different religions. We also could do ethnic background, or family life, or another social justice issue. There are lots of them, I promise you. And it could also even just be as simple as a disagreement with your siblings. Anything like that would work. Just explain it as best you can, and we have a Google form at the bottom for you to do that. But for next time, we're going to be moving on to Chapter 9, Knowing When to Walk Away. So I want you guys to answer the questions on the Google form, and then remember how trading perspectives can be used in conflict. And finally, think about when you should walk away from conflict. Okay, thank you guys so much. Have a great week.